tried to warn you as much as possible, but I think both of us were totally surprised by the reaction after the first 5-6 months when we had to ourselves of what actually happened from then. So I think you can have as many conversations as you want and try and prepare as much as possible, but we were totally unprepared for what happened after that.
3 weeks after the yacht photographs shattered public perception, the illusion of a royal love story began to crack from within. The discovery was deceptively simple: a navy blue canvas bag with gold lettering that read Soho House. What at first seemed like a trivial background detail soon became the thread that unraveled a grand design. For Prince Harry, that small emblem opened a corridor into a world of quiet influence, elite networking, and connections that blurred the line between destiny and design. Was love ever truly spontaneous in circles, where every introduction could be arranged and every meeting a strategy? The question hung heavy, echoing through royal halls and tabloid headlines alike. The images had first emerged from Croatia, sun-drenched carefree, the kind of luxury few ever experience. But beneath the glittering surface, that single bag whispered of deeper networks. Soho House, long considered a haven for celebrities, and power brokers represented more than exclusivity. It symbolized access, the invisible currency of status and influence. The deeper Harry looked into those glossy, curated photos, the clearer it became that this was no random coincidence. It was an entry point into a labyrinth of connections stretching across London, Toronto, and Los Angeles. As reports from online archives and forgotten society blogs resurfaced, the figure of Marcus Anderson emerged. His name, once a casual footnote in entertainment circles, began to appear repeatedly beside influential patrons, socialites, and media personalities. A consultant for Soho House International, Anderson operated in the quiet space between fame and opportunity. Officially, his role was benign event coordination, brand management, networking. But accounts from former members painted a more complex picture. He was described as a gatekeeper, a matchmaker, even a strategist who curated relationships among the ambitious and the powerful. It was said that he made the right people meet. What those connections produced often changed lives and occasionally headlines. For Meghan Markle, Anderson had been a visible companion during her years in Toronto. Their friendship, according to public appearances, seemed natural, a shared lifestyle among creative professionals. Yet, to observers tracing timelines, the overlap between her Soho House years and her eventual introduction to the British royal seemed almost too precise. Photos from Istanbul, Barcelona, and London placed her consistently within elite circles already orbiting the prince's world. To those who believe in fate, it might have looked like serendipity. To skeptics, it resembled choreography. The visual evidence spoke volumes: glamorous parties, rooftop gatherings, and philanthropic events populated by the same names that would later appear in royal guest lists. Even charity donors to Prince Harry's own initiatives appeared in the background of earlier photographs with Markle years before the official blind date. What are the odds that one woman could so effortlessly navigate identical networks without intention? As investigative journalists later noted, the coincidences felt too abundant to dismiss as chance. For Harry, this pattern represented something more than betrayal, it was revelation. The concept of control, long central to royal life, suddenly felt inverted. He was no longer the selector, but the selected. The curated imagery of modern monarchy tradition, wrapped in media perfection, had masked a truth far more unsettling: that influence could move both ways. While the world watched a love story unfold, another narrative ran parallel, one of ambition, opportunity, and social engineering hidden beneath romance. Experts in elite networking have noted that organizations like Soho House often function as cultural crossroads spaces where art business and politics intersect discreetly. Former insiders told lifestyle journalists that introductions were everything, and access once granted could transform entire careers. Within that system, charm became capital and appearances a form of currency. In such environments, relationships could be genuine, but were rarely uncalculated. The question was never just who you knew, but why. But by the time Harry recognized the depth of these interconnections, it was too late to separate emotion from evidence. The images, the names, the memberships, they aligned too perfectly. What began as an innocent investigation into one photograph evolved into a revelation that reframed his entire marriage. He wasn't uncovering random details. He was exposing an ecosystem of influence surrounding the woman he thought he had chosen freely. The discovery struck like a cold current through the fantasy of modern royalty, reminding the public of how easily image could overshadow intent. The larger narrative extended beyond a single couple. It raised universal questions about power and authenticity in an age where status can be engineered. How many relationships in the public eye are born of genuine connection, and how many are crafted through careful alignment of ambition and access? The story of one photograph became a cautionary tale for a world obsessed with image status and social ascent. The deeper the investigation reached, the clearer the contours of the hidden network became. Beneath the polished image of luxury lounges and rooftop parties lay a tightly woven web of introductions, gatekeepers and silent facilitators who shaped the social elite from behind velvet curtains. At the center of this world stood Marcus Anderson, a figure described by many as both charming and calculating, someone who understood that influence moved not through titles, but through proximity. In the circles of Soho House, proximity was everything: who sat beside whom, who was introduced to whom, and who left together when the cameras were gone. Each encounter could open doors that would otherwise remain locked. It was within this environment that the legend of Anderson's networking genius grew. According to former members and journalists who later reconstructed his career, Anderson operated as a connector between ambition and opportunity. He did not simply plan events, he curated outcomes. Models met investors, actresses met producers, entrepreneurs met royalty. His purpose was to align aspiration with advantage, ensuring that every introduction served a strategic function. The model was subtle, nearly invisible to those outside its glow. It was not an escort service, not a formal agency, but something more refined, a social mechanism engineered to fuse desire with status. For those familiar with London's private club culture, this was not entirely surprising. Similar networks had existed for decades, serving as the invisible machinery of fame and fortune. Yet what made Soho House unique was its ability to disguise strategic networking as effortless sociability. It was exclusive enough to feel secret, yet open enough to attract a constant flow of new faces, willing to play by its unspoken rules. Those rules were simple: appear successful, cultivate connections, and never acknowledge the choreography behind them. Observers studying Meghan Markle's ascent have pointed to this system as both the stage and the script of her transformation. Before meeting Prince Harry, she had already woven herself through this circuit of influence. Archived photographs and event guest lists demonstrated her consistent presence among financiers, aristocrats, and entertainment executives, people who would later appear within the prince's own orbit. Each appearance seemed casual, yet the pattern revealed structure. The Soho House network, viewed through this lens, functioned as a social elevator, one that required neither birthright nor inheritance, only access and intent. Cultural commentators later drew parallels between this hidden infrastructure and historical precedents of power matchmaking within European high society. Where traditional aristocracy once relied on arranged marriages and diplomatic unions, the modern elite used curated spaces like Soho House to achieve similar outcomes, alliances of image, influence, and wealth. The faces were younger, the dress codes looser, but the motives remained strikingly familiar. In this modern courtship of convenience, ambition was not condemned, it was expected. Prince Harry's gradual recognition of this framework marked a pivotal turning point. The romantic narrative that had captivated millions began to unravel in his mind, replaced by the realization that he might have been the final link in a chain of introductions years in the making. What if his own story had been written long before he'd even entered the room? Analysts observing royal dynamics have suggested that this moment represented not only personal disillusionment, but also a symbolic collision between two worlds, the rigid hierarchy of royalty and the fluid performative hierarchy of celebrity. Behind the glamour, however, lay a darker question. Could such systems exist without moral compromise? The idea of social grooming, where individuals are prepared and positioned for advancement through influence networks, raised ethical concerns. Was this empowerment or manipulation? For women like Markle, participation in such circles offered access to power structures historically closed to outsiders. Yet the price of admission was often invisibly steep. Personal authenticity sacrificed for opportunity, private ambition transformed into public narrative. Media analysts described the Soho House network as a modern mirror of Hollywood's golden era studios, where careers were manufactured and images carefully maintained. Except this time, the stage was global, amplified by social media and royal fascination. Each photo, each gala, each handshake contributed to a curated mythology. By the time Meghan Markle's romance with Prince Harry became public, her story had already been rehearsed in 100 private rooms, where reputations were negotiated and alliances sealed. The allure of this system was undeniable. For many, it represented meritocracy, the ability to rise not through bloodline, but through charisma and strategy. Yet the danger lay in its opacity. Without accountability, influence turned predatory, and ambition blurred into exploitation. As reports of Anderson's finishing school circulated among insiders, the line between mentorship and manipulation became impossible to define. What emerged from Harry's discovery was not merely gossip, but a case study in how modern elites manufacture both power and perception. The Soho House web illustrated that in the 21st century, image and influence could be engineered as efficiently as any corporate brand. And at the center of that machinery stood individuals whose motives were as calculated as they were concealed. The revelation forced a difficult question, one that extended beyond royalty in a world built on image. Can genuine connection ever survive the weight of strategy? What began as an investigation into a name and a photograph evolved into an understanding of a hidden social institution, one that operated with the precision of a school, but without classrooms, textbooks, or declared intentions. Insiders called it a finishing school, though its curriculum had little to do with etiquette. Instead, it trained participants to navigate the world of the powerful with quiet mastery. Behind the warm glow of Soho House's lounges, a new kind of education unfolded, one where charm replaced credentials and the ability to connect replaced the need to belong. This was the world that had shaped Meghan's transformation from television actress to global figure. And it was a revelation that left observers questioning where opportunity ended and orchestration began. Accounts from former members and social insiders describe Marcus Anderson's role as that of an informal tutor, a cultural guide for those who wished to rise above their stations. He identified individuals with potential and provided them with the resources, introductions, and polish required to ascend. In this system, success depended on presentation. Every outfit, every pose in a photograph, every social media caption served as part of a larger performance. The result was an illusion of spontaneity that masked rigorous preparation. Researchers of modern social mobility have compared Soho House to the private salons of 19th century Europe, where emerging elites learned the codes of aristocracy. But this modern version operated on a global scale, connecting cities from Istanbul to Los Angeles through a network of events, private lounges, and curated relationships. The people who thrived in this ecosystem were not necessarily the wealthiest, but the most adaptive, those who understood how to use proximity to power as a substitute for power itself. For Harry, the implications were devastating. The realization that his world, once thought to be insulated by birthright, had been breached not by coincidence but by design, represented a profound rupture in trust. Experts in royal history have noted that no previous generation of the monarchy had faced a challenge quite like this: the intersection of social media, celebrity culture, and romantic narrative. Traditional vetting had failed because the threat did not come from political ambition or espionage, but from something subtler: cultural infiltration through charm and visibility. Within this context, Anderson's so-called finishing school appeared less like mentorship and more like social engineering. It did not merely connect individuals, it crafted trajectories. It taught aspirants how to be seen in the right rooms, how to speak in the right tones, how to navigate conversations that opened invisible gates. Every connection was a rung on a ladder, one built not of effort alone, but of perception. Those who mastered the performance could move effortlessly between classes, industries, and even continents. Sociologists studying influencer culture later drew parallels between this phenomenon and the broader dynamics of the digital age, where personal branding often outweighs substance. In a world where visibility equates to credibility, Soho House had become a physical manifestation of Instagram's curated perfection. To the public, it represented exclusivity. To its insiders, it was a workshop of influence, one that required constant reinvention to maintain relevance. The same journalists who had once praised Meghan's networking acumen began revisiting her earlier timeline with sharper scrutiny. The photographs that once symbolized glamour now carried subtext evidence of deliberate positioning of long-term social navigation. Each city, each event, each connection traced a path toward greater exposure. By 2016, that path intersected directly with royalty. Whether by coincidence or by calculation, the convergence felt inevitable. Critics of this interpretation argue that ambition alone cannot be condemned. After all, history is filled with figures who advance through charm, intelligence, and timing. Yet the ethical tension lies in transparency. When opportunity is built on concealment, authenticity becomes collateral damage. The idea that personal relationships might be shaped by institutional design challenges society's faith in romance itself. Was love still love if it had been arranged by algorithms of access? The concept of the finishing school thus evolved into a metaphor for modern social ambition. It symbolized how individuals could reinvent themselves through exposure to elite networks, how image could transcend class, and how narratives could be rewritten with strategic precision. But as with any transformation, the process demanded trade-offs: privacy, sincerity, even emotional stability. Prince Harry's revelation exposed not only the machinery of elite networking, but also the fragility of identity within it. The same system that had polished and propelled Meghan had also consumed her individuality, turning her story into a product of cultural aspiration. As royal commentators noted, the consequences of this discovery rippled far beyond one marriage. It marked the collision of monarchy and modernity, a clash between hereditary prestige and manufactured fame. In the end, the finishing school stood as both symbol and warning. It demonstrated that influence, once a privilege of birth, could now be learned, purchased, or curated. But it also revealed the emotional toll of living within such a system, a place where affection could never be fully separated from ambition. The question lingered like a shadow across the royal narrative in a world that teaches people how to ascend. Who teaches them how to stay true? As the layers of revelation deepened, the investigation shifted from curiosity to confrontation. The focus turned to numbers, airfares, wardrobe budgets, luxury memberships. The lifestyle captured in countless photographs no longer aligned with the income of a television actress. What had once appeared as the natural evolution of a rising star now resembled a meticulously financed operation. The financial trail told a story of invisible sponsorship, of someone or something bankrolling access to circles reserved for the world's most powerful. The mystery no longer revolved around who Meghan knew, but how she could afford to know them. Analysts in entertainment finance quickly pointed out the incongruence. A mid-level salary from a cable series like Suits could not sustain the kind of international travel and designer appearances seen in Markle's pre-royal years. Flight patterns traced her movements across continents: Toronto to Istanbul, London to Barcelona, New York to Los Angeles, with remarkable frequency. The total cost of maintaining such a lifestyle, including wardrobe, lodging, and elite club memberships, exceeded $70,000 annually. Yet official income records showed less than that per season. Somewhere funds were flowing unseen. That revelation led directly back to Soho House. Leaked information from former staff and membership coordinators suggested that certain high-profile individuals received what were discreetly termed corporate sponsorships membership fees, paid through company accounts, often in exchange for social visibility. It was an unspoken arrangement. The more a person could enhance the club's image or draw influential guests, the less they paid. The same principle applied to luxury brands that quietly lent wardrobes to favored members. Publicity functioned as currency. Influence became the medium of exchange. Investigators with knowledge of celebrity public relations later revealed that such arrangements were far from rare. In elite social networks, financial sponsorship often appeared as friendship and corporate promotion as generosity. Yet in this case, the implications reached deeper, touching the royal institution itself. If Markle's ascent had been financed through strategic intermediaries, then the monarchy, one of the last bastions of inherited legitimacy, had unwittingly merged with the machinery of modern branding. The fairy tale of love across social classes transformed into a parable about the monetization of romance. Social critics describe this as the commodification of connection. The idea that relationships, particularly those under public scrutiny, could carry economic value was not new, but the scope of it within this context was staggering. Every appearance, every handshake, every friendship doubled as an investment. The blurred boundary between authenticity and performance made it nearly impossible to determine where personal intent ended and public strategy began. Could a person living under constant observation ever separate sincerity from spectacle? From an institutional perspective, the revelation struck at the heart of royal credibility. Historians have long noted that royal marriages were once instruments of diplomacy. Now they seemed to serve the optics of global celebrity. The discovery that external financiers might have facilitated Meghan's rise suggested that the old rules of class and privilege had been replaced by newer, subtler systems of influence. The monarchy, built on the myth of moral superiority, now faced a mirror reflecting its own vulnerability to manipulation. The emotional toll on Harry, as portrayed in later biographical accounts, was profound. The man who had once fought to modernize royal identity found himself trapped between two realities: an institution that distrusted outsiders and a partner whose ascent depended on the very forces that institution feared. His disillusionment was not only personal, but existential. The modern prince, raised to believe in the sanctity of duty and sincerity, was forced to confront a truth more suited to the digital age: authenticity could be manufactured and intimacy could be branded. Media scholars analyzing this saga interpreted it as part of a broader transformation of public life. The intersection of celebrity culture and monarchy created a new kind of spectacle, one that blurred fiction and reality. The lavish lifestyle financed by invisible hands symbolized a post-traditional world where access mattered more than heritage, and narratives could be scripted as effectively as television dramas. The palace, once a fortress of tradition, had become an extension of the media stage. At its core, the financial discrepancy revealed a larger societal paradox. The same culture that celebrated independence and self-made success quietly rewarded those who mastered systems of dependence and sponsorship. Meghan's story, whether viewed as empowerment or orchestration, embodied that contradiction perfectly. She had learned to navigate a world that demanded both performance and authenticity, leveraging perception as her most valuable asset. Yet every triumph carried the trace of unseen assistance, a reminder that in elite society, merit rarely moved alone. By the time the financial evidence surfaced, the narrative had shifted irreversibly. What began as a romance was now interpreted as an equation: visibility multiplied by influence divided by cost. The romantic myth of a self-made duchess gave way to a corporate reality of strategic investment. The revelations didn't merely expose a person, they exposed a system that rewarded ambition disguised as destiny. And within that system, love itself became just another luxury item, priced, polished, and painfully unsustainable. The most disturbing realization came not from photographs or receipts, but from a single document: the wedding guest list. Buried within that 600-name archive was the final confirmation that the prince's most sacred day might have doubled as a social summit. When examined closely, the pattern was undeniable. Among the attendees on Meghan's side were dozens of familiar names, each one traceable to the same elite network that had shaped her rise. More than 60 guests by one count were connected directly to Soho House members, executives, or frequent collaborators of the club's international branches. What had once been described as a union of love began to resemble a merger of influence. To outside observers, the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2018 had symbolized a new era, an institution of tradition, embracing modernity, diversity, and change. But within the palace, whispers told a different story. Analysts examining the guest list years later would describe it as a portrait of global networking disguised as romance. The guest of honor, Marcus Anderson, stood among the front rows, flanked by fellow executives and social architects who had orchestrated introductions and events throughout Meghan's pre-royal years. Their presence was not coincidental. It was ceremonial, a recognition of completion. In retrospect, the composition of that crowd offered a rare glimpse into the intersection of monarchy and celebrity. The British royal family had long curated its public image through carefully managed appearances, but never before had it opened its gates to a guest list drawn so heavily from the machinery of entertainment and branding. To some, it was a triumph of inclusivity. To others, it was the infiltration of an ecosystem built on optics, ambition, and strategy. The monarchy, one of history's most rigid institutions, had been woven into the web of curated modern elite culture. Sociologists later defined the event as a cultural convergence, where the gravitational pull of the crown and the celebrity industry temporarily aligned. For Markle's network, it was validation. For the palace, exposure. Photographs from the reception circulated globally, revealing not just joy, but alignment. Executives, influencers, and creative directors mingling under royal chandeliers. It was, as one columnist put it, a coronation for a new kind of power. The question few dared to ask was whether that power had always intended to end there. Years later, royal historians would argue that this moment marked the symbolic turning point of the monarchy's identity crisis. The wedding represented not merely a personal union, but a shift from hereditary privilege to performative prestige. By inviting the architects of her ascent, Meghan had effectively brought the blueprint of her world into the royal court. It was no longer just about bloodlines, it was about networks. And through those networks, the boundaries between palace and publicity dissolved. When Harry revisited that list in private, the pattern grew haunting. The Toronto contingent included multiple names who had appeared alongside Meghan in photographs dating as far back as 2013. London guests overlapped with donors to his own charities. Even figures from the entertainment industry who had barely known the couple personally appeared to have gained access through association with Soho House. To the public, these details seemed harmless, but for those who understood the mechanics of influence, they revealed an invisible architecture behind the royal facade. Cultural critics have since compared this phenomenon to historical moments when monarchy and commerce intertwined. Just as 18th century royals sponsored portrait artists to shape their legacy, the 21st century monarchy now found itself influenced by image brokers, branding strategists, and social media executives. The medium had changed, but the manipulation remained. The wedding of 2018, once remembered for its modern fairy tale imagery, now reads like the closing act of a carefully directed play, its climax not love but validation. Love, but yet amid the analysis and speculation, another perspective emerged, one rooted in empathy rather than accusation. Perhaps some argued Meghan had simply mastered the game she had been forced to play. The entertainment industry rewards visibility, not humility, preparation, not purity. In a world where every opportunity depends on connection, could ambition truly be condemned? If society builds ladders only for those who know where to climb, then perhaps she had only followed the design others had set? The ethical line between survival and manipulation, between networking and exploitation, remains painfully blurred. But the cost of such ascension was steep. For Prince Harry, realization arrived with a sense of quiet devastation. His wedding day, intended as a culmination of freedom and love, now appeared as a tableau of orchestration, a celebration not of emotion, but of accomplishment. Historians may one day interpret this not as betrayal, but as the inevitable collision between tradition and ambition. When ancient power meets modern strategy, one must bend to the other. In this case, the crown itself became the stage upon which a social ascent reached its zenith. As commentators observed in the years that followed, the true tragedy lay not in deceit, but in disillusionment. The prince who once sought to redefine the meaning of royalty discovered that even love could be leveraged as spectacle. The question now persisted: was the institution changed by her presence, or was it exposed by it? The final act of revelation came not from journalists or investigators, but from the quiet hum of an old voicemail. Buried in the digital archives of his phone were messages from Prince William, warnings that had once gone unheeded, dismissed as jealousy or condescension. As Harry replayed those recordings years later, the tone of his brother's voice told a story of caution rather than envy. The words were measured, deliberate, and grounded in information from palace security, a pattern of connections linking Meghan to Soho House long before she entered royal life. It was not gossip. It was intelligence. And in that moment, the truth arrived, not with anger, but with grief. William's concerns now resurfaced, aligned with what Harry's own investigation had exposed. The photographs, the overlapping networks, the comped memberships, all of it had been known to the palace in fragments buried under the discretion of protocol. Security reports had traced her social presence in circles adjacent to the royal family years before their first meeting. Background checks had noted the depth of Marcus Anderson's influence. The institution had observed quietly, unwilling to interfere with the prince's personal life after decades of criticism over controlling royal marriages. And so the silence persisted, until the consequences became irreversible. From a cinematic standpoint, it was the moment of emotional collapse. A man once celebrated for breaking royal barriers found himself confronting the possibility that the greatest love story of his generation had been orchestrated with precision. In documentaries and royal analyses that followed, historians framed this period as the Great Unraveling. The illusion of autonomy, so central to Harry's identity, disintegrated before his eyes. Every memory began to feel suspect. Every introduction replayed in his mind as if scripted. The royal rebel had not escaped control. He had simply traded one system of manipulation for another. Media scholars later described this realization as emblematic of the post-truth age, a time when perception eclipses authenticity. Harry, who had once sought freedom from palace control, had instead become ensnared in a subtler web, one spun not by monarchs but by marketers. The monarchy's machinery operated through secrecy, Soho houses through access. Both systems thrived on illusion, yet one had disguised itself as liberation. The irony was brutal. In fleeing from the rigidity of the crown, he had fallen into the velvet trap of curated modern fame. The confrontation that followed within the household was by all accounts silent but seismic. Trust eroded into vigilance. Each event, meeting, and message became an object of scrutiny. Palace insiders reported that the prince grew increasingly withdrawn, a man at war with both his past and present. Staff described long nights spent combing through social media archives, tracing timelines, comparing names. The investigation had consumed him entirely, not as vengeance, but as a desperate attempt to reclaim control over a narrative that had never truly been his. Psychologists analyzing the case from afar have since pointed to a broader theme: the human need to impose meaning on chaos. For Harry, understanding the architecture of manipulation offered temporary relief from emotional devastation. But the cost was isolation. In the public eye, he remained defiant. In private, he was fractured. The idea that his life, love, and even rebellion might have been predetermined by unseen forces created a sense of existential betrayal. What, after all, remains of identity when every choice turns out to have been anticipated? Royal commentators have suggested that this period marked the symbolic end of the fairy tale era. The public's fascination with royal romance shifted toward skepticism. Documentaries, think pieces, and op-eds dissected the marriage not as a love story, but as a cultural transaction, a merging of legacy and image. The crown, once an emblem of timelessness, had been pulled into the modern marketplace of narratives. Authenticity, that most sacred of royal commodities, now seemed negotiable. Yet even amid the cynicism, one question refused to fade: was this outcome inevitable? In a society driven by exposure, where privacy is currency and identity is curated, perhaps no public figure can truly escape design. The tragedy of Harry's awakening lies not in deceit, but in recognition that love, when entangled with power, can never be entirely pure. And still, despite the revelations, the human heart clings to the hope that somewhere beneath the machinery, a fragment of truth remains. Today, the echoes of that discovery linger as both warning and reflection. The Soho House network, once a symbol of cosmopolitan glamour, has become shorthand for the peril of constructed connection. Historians will continue to debate whether Meghan was architect or apprentice, manipulator or participant, but one fact remains constant: she mastered a system that rewards visibility over sincerity. The monarchy, for all its age, was unprepared for such mastery. In the end, the story transcends individuals. It speaks to a generation raised on image, where ambition wears the face of authenticity, and love must survive the scrutiny of the global stage. Perhaps the lesson is not that fairy tales are false, but that they now demand producers, publicists, and perfectly staged lighting. The modern prince, once a soldier and symbol, became a witness to how power and affection intertwine in the digital age, a collision of heart and empire, scripted and unscripted, real and unreal. And so the question endures unanswered, but essential in a world built on exposure: can love ever be private again? The saga of Prince Harry's disillusionment with the world surrounding Meghan Markle's Soho House origins has become one of the most haunting modern parables of power, image, and identity. What began as a romance celebrated for breaking centuries of royal convention evolved into a revelation about how influence operates in the 21st century. Across continents and curated events, every photograph, connection, and introduction appeared less like coincidence and more like choreography. The deeper one looked, The clearer the machinery became a network that rewarded charm as currency ambition, as virtue and association as access. The evidence suggested not merely a series of social encounters, but a system of social engineering, one that blurred the lines between mentorship and manipulation. In this ecosystem, success was never organic. It was manufactured through proximity to influence. Meghan's ascent, framed publicly as a story of perseverance and authenticity, carried beneath it the unmistakable fingerprints of orchestration. Her Soho house years illustrated how modern power no longer resides solely in lineage or wealth, but in the capacity to navigate curated networks where image outweighs inheritance. For Harry, the emotional fallout was seismic. The man who had rebelled against royal control found himself captive to another invisible hierarchy, the networked aristocracy of global celebrity. His journey exposed a larger truth about contemporary society, that visibility has become a form of royalty, and love itself can be packaged, promoted, and monetized. In the ruins of that discovery lies a universal dilemma: how to distinguish authenticity from performance in an age when both are sold under the same spotlight. Yet beyond scandal and sorrow, this story holds a mirror to modern culture. It challenges the audience to ask how much of what they see on screens and headlines in the images of perfection has been designed to elicit admiration rather than understanding. It asks whether ambition can exist without exploitation, and whether institutions as ancient as monarchy can survive the seduction of branding. Perhaps in the quiet of hindsight, the lesson is simple: when every connection becomes a transaction, the cost of sincerity becomes immeasurable. The love story that once symbolized hope for a modern monarchy now stands as a cautionary tale about the price of exposure in an age that confuses access with intimacy. Thank you for watching and reflecting. Do you believe true love can survive in a world where image rules reality? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive reports into the unseen forces shaping modern history.